Hello, listeners, and welcome to Driving the Future podcast in association with Barclays and Big Commerce, discovering what the future of online looks like for the automotive industry. And today's episode is centered around leveraging TikTok for automotive brands. And I'm super excited to be joined by Jack Carter, Brand Partnerships Lead at TikTok. How are you doing today, Jack?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for spending some time and kind of joining us for today's podcast. Really appreciate taking time out of your hectic schedule, no doubt. So, it'd be great for our listeners to understand a bit more about yourself, Jack. What's your background and how long you've been at TikTok and what do you do there?
Yeah, so I've been at TikTok for 3.5 years now, with a focus purely on the automotive vertical. And my role is quite simply to get car brands onto TikTok and advertising on TikTok. So my progression over the last 3 years has been a varied one, as you can imagine. You know, starting out when I joined, very little was known about TikTok within the automotive space, and so it was a challenge to get brands on there. But in over those course of those 3 years, and particularly those last kind of year and a half to 2 years, we've seen huge uptake across brands, OEMs, and dealerships alike coming to TikTok. And really, I think seeing an opportunity to tap into a very new audience. And I think, one of the challenges I had when I first joined way back when, it was the summer of 2020, there was kind of a misconception about TikTok and the audience that we had on the platform. The perception being it was too young. And what we've seen and what a lot of brands have come to appreciate, that we have a hugely diverse audience, and we have a platform of diverse content. And so actually there's no reason that a car brand can't be on TikTok, and they can't achieve success there. So it's been really encouraging to see. We've had some really good case studies over the last 12 months of OEMs achieving some strong success on the platform, and hopefully long may it continue.
Definitely. So, in terms of kind of that 3.5 year period,
Yeah.
has it been a transitional piece where initially it was quite difficult and now it's very much more in the media, so they understand there's different ways to touch the audiences? Is it much smoother onboarding because you've got these case studies now, or is it still difficult to kind of win people over in terms of spending some of the ad spend or kind of their campaigns around TikTok as a channel?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good place to start there is kind of maybe defining what TikTok is, and explaining exactly what we are as a platform, because we are an entertainment rather than a social platform. It's a small nuance, but an important one to make, because users come to TikTok not necessarily to be connected with their friends, even though that functionality is there. They come to TikTok to be entertained and to discover new things. And so that mindset that users are within the TikTok space, and they kind of have that approach, means they're engaged and they like watching content. And so there's an opportunity when a brand leads in to entertaining content, then the user is going to respond quite well to that. And so it means, when I've spoken to automotive brands, and car brands love to tell stories. Traditionally, they have. It's been an industry whereby communications has always been very interesting. We know the life cycle, the purchase cycle of a car is not a quick one. It can take many, many months and has many different touch points. And so in reality, we need to build up an audience. We need to build up fans of the brand. It's not just a case of going, oh, let's go purchase a car tomorrow, though I'm sure ideally that would be quite nice in some instances. It's about developing fans that engage with you as a brand, and communities on TikTok that engage with you as a profile or as a brand or personality on the platform. And so I think at the start, 3.5 years ago, TikTok was a slight unknown. And often the question was, well, how do we do it? And so there was an education not only around the audience that we have on the platform, but also around how you can lean in creatively. And really, as it's progressed and developed and brands have become more familiar, OEMs and dealerships alike, with TikTok and with the creative element, and with the, I guess, creative excitement that comes with TikTok, that they've seen the more that they lean into the platform, the more they kind of get in return. And when I say more like lean into the platform, I mean turning up in an authentic way. So what we know that doesn't work on TikTok is repurposing a big TV advert and cutting that down, because it's kind of tone deaf to the rest of the platform, the rest of the content that's on TikTok. 61% of our users want and expect to see different content from car manufacturers that they see on telly. So we know that the community wants to see native content, and so it's about brands leaning in. So yes, at the start it was about kind of education, a bit of hand holding, but actually as we progressed and brands have become familiar, as with anything new, then they've kind of seen the ease in which they can develop content that really does work on the platform. Oh, you're actually on mute, Graham, so I can't hear you.
There we go.
I
Thank
was
you for
trying to
helping
lip
me out on
read.
that one.
I was trying to lip read, but I couldn't quite.
Yeah. In terms of kind of that's a really interesting point that you've made there about kind of TikTok's centricity is around entertainment, not necessarily the social engagement.
Yeah.
And kind of replicating what's on television isn't necessarily going to work on TikTok for the audience. So just going into a little bit about what works really well. Because that's a really new thought process for automotive OEMs and dealerships. What works well? What campaigns really engage the audience on TikTok for the automotive industry?
Yeah, good question. And there's a whole host. And I think automotive obviously is a huge category. We have at one end the luxury space, and often the luxury automotive brands. They were interestingly one of the first, let's say, category within the industry to come to TikTok. I often get asked why that was the case. And I think it's because luxury automotive kind of operates differently to the rest of the category in the way that they're appealing to really might not be the buyer of today, but in 10, 15 years time. And so they understand around kind of brand equity and building that up across a series of years. So actually some of the first profiles and brands we saw on TikTok were Mercedes, were Lamborghini, Bentley, recently the likes of Range Rover and Defender. And so they're about, as I said, kind of the upper funnel element, right? They kind of want to build up, the lovers of their brand. And so they get chosen over their competitors when the time is right. Beyond that, in terms of the more volume OEMs, we've seen a huge amount of success, and that's across the funnel. A recent campaign to pull out was a one for Peugeot, which was Always In. So Always In is as a term we use at TikTok as being always on content. So basically always having a presence within paid media on TikTok across the year. Now, whilst Always On is great because there's going to be consistent presence for you as a brand on the platform, with TikTok, as I mentioned, it's all around engaging with communities. So you need to make sure that you're not just on the platform, but that you're doing it in the right way. So we always say about always being in and within communities. And so Peugeot were one of the first brands to launch with this strategy. And they basically ran a campaign for 3 months. It kicked off at the end of last year and ran into the start of 2023. And they developed a range of assets. I think it was around 25 in total. They worked with an automotive creator called She Talks Cars, who you or some of your listeners may be familiar with, as well as working with one of our creative partners, Uncovered. And the idea being they were to develop a suite of assets that could really work across the funnel, be that an upper funnel in terms of driving brand awareness, all the way down to lead gen. And so we're ticking off that kind of performance box. So to take an example, the content they created at the upper end was they developed a bespoke song, which is called TikTok Maybe Drive It. And they worked with a producer and they used sounds from one of their Peugeots. I think it was the 208. So the producer was bang on the bonnet, shutting the door, and it all formed as kind of the track. And that was a track which then ran through the rest of the campaign. In reality, that's not necessarily going to be performance because it's all around kind of entertaining. The further we get down the funnel, then we will start working with the likes of She Talks Cars because she's an expert voice within the industry. And so we'd be focusing on more product stories when we're working with her, with Abigail. And it's about car reviews, looking at the Peugeot, what's the benefit of it, what's it going to give me as a potential buyer. And that stuff kind of operates at obviously the more mid and lower funnel because you're then focusing on what makes Peugeot good as a product rather than just a brand. And so they ran across those 3 months, as I said, 25 assets, around 8 or 9 a month. And what they saw was a significant uplift and upweight across awareness, recall, and even intent. So intent saw a 76% increase across those 3 months. Now, to start to move the needle on intent is traditionally very difficult with automotive campaigns, just because, buying a car, as we know, is something which isn't, as a decision, isn't made lightly. And so you very rarely see that after one campaign. But Peugeot's commitment to TikTok from an always in perspective, to have that constant presence, to be tapping into car reviews, to be tapping into songs. They did content around seasonality, so they wrapped up one of their Peugeots at Christmas time, and it was kind of an ASMR piece of content. To be tapping into New Year trends, so they worked with the creator, where it was around a health, a fitness focused creator, and so she was all about going kind of following her day in the life of what she did in January as you kind of restart the body clock, etc. And the Peugeot was kind of the point that got her from A to B. And so they saw some really good successful returns. And I think that was a demonstration of if you lean into the platform beyond just running a single campaign and actually tapping into communities that you want to be talking to as a brand, you can see some really significant results.
Awesome. I think that's really interesting as a kind of a case study there. And there's a couple of things I just want to kind of touch on there. So one of the things is around the audience. So some of our listeners might not think necessarily that what Peugeot have done over the past few months and years necessarily resonates with their audience, and it might just be that there's a misconception of what the TikTok audience is. Is it teenagers kind of scrolling
Yeah.
through? So how does the demographic and the audience sit with TikTok, and how has it grown and changed over the past few years and months, essentially?
Yeah, it's a very fair question, and probably the question I've been asked the most over the last 3 years, as you'd expect, on working with cars and car brands and OEMs. We have, as I mentioned, aged up significantly since I've joined, and the benefits can be seen in terms of the success that the OEM campaigns have received. The reason being, and why we've aged up and why we've diversified, is because TikTok as an experience is very unique to you as a user. So the For You page, which is in essence the home page and where most of our users spend the majority of their time, that's where you discover content, and that's where the algorithm feeds content to you that it thinks that you will enjoy watching. My For You page will be different to yours. It will be different to my friends and to my clients. I think my granddad's even on a TikTok at the minute. His For You page will be very different. So there is no reason why it is just focused on one particular age demographic, because it's so personalized and so unique to you. The amount of content on TikTok is so diverse and so wide ranging, and so the experience is really irrelevant or irrespective of age. It's down to what you like and what you enjoy. So my For You page at the minute is a lot of recipes, a bit of DIY. I'm still hopeless, but I try.
You got to try.
I have to try. Falling down shelves across my flat, but I give it a go. Obviously, cars. So when I talk to my clients, I show the diversity of these of the content on the platform, as well as the brands that we have on TikTok as well. Not just as said that within the luxury automotive space, but generally across the board. There isn't really the age question or challenge. It doesn't really matter as much anymore, because we have such a diverse audience. And I think, if we weren't seeing the success that we have been seeing with these campaigns, that then there's the night we say, well, actually, we don't have the audience, but we are. And so we can say, well, actually, you're not only going to be reaching a diverse audience, there's an opportunity to reach a new audience that you may not actually be talking to on other platforms. That's also obviously a very interesting angle for OEMs.
No, that's super interesting. I think the other component of that was around attribution. So how is it that either Peugeot or yourself managed to attribute, whilst there's obviously a huge increase in engagement, how does that attribute it to actual, physical rentals of those cars or purchases of those cars?
Yeah. So in terms of the measurement, we run something called a brand lift study, where we can measure campaigns, and we can do that as a first party, where we run that ourselves, or we work with third party partners as well, who will run those studies and basically measure the success of the performance of the campaign. Alongside that, we obviously have, as I mentioned earlier, lead generation as a product. And so where we are focusing on pushing users to test drive a particular car. And so we have an ability where you can fill in a form on TikTok, and then that will drive through, and that'll be through, we work with several CRM partners, which basically will track the data and then pass it over to the local dealership, who will then give that user who's inputted their information a call and to book in that test drive. We realize the importance of that test drive within automotive. The likelihood of you purchasing the car when you test drive it obviously goes up significantly. So we're all about not just focusing on what you can do at the upper end of the funnel. It's about what you can do throughout it as well. And I would say in terms on that point, even when we get to performance content, so even when we're trying to drive traffic to websites, whether that's the car configurator or the homepage of a new model, or it's lead gen, even though your content is going to be a little bit more focused and pointed and probably hardworking, because we're trying to convert that sale or get them towards that point of sale, it still needs to be engaging and entertaining. And so we always talk about what's the narrative that you're trying to tell as a brand, what's the story behind it. And it could be something as simple as we're going to shoot it in an interesting and dynamic way. And we know that users are used to seeing things which might be quite fast paced or edited to music. And so there are simple things that you can do by taking what might be a necessarily quite a mundane asset and elevating it so that it really kind of engages with the audience.
Understood. That's really interesting. So we touched on kind of OEMs predominantly there. How are
Yeah.
dealerships creating this content or engaging? Do you have any kind of case studies or examples of dealerships who's really kind of gone, yes, we see the success here, or yes, we see the engagement here?
Yeah. I mean, Arnold Clark have done a really, really good job on TikTok. I think actually, before I get into that, I would just say there's a couple of things, a couple of kind of points to mention. When brands come onto TikTok, brands can have a presence without a profile or with a profile.
Okay.
So they can run paid ads without necessarily having what we'd call an organic profile on TikTok. Equally, they can do both. And equally, they can just have an organic profile without running any paid as well. So it's a variety of options. I can't say in terms of what's the percentage split. There's a variety, but there are kind of two ways. So if listeners are thinking, well, how do I get involved? You can kick off with just paid advertising if you wanted to, or you can start with an organic profile and then build up to a paid strategy. So back to the Arnold Clark example. So they're organic. They have an organic presence on TikTok, and I think they've kind of taken this dynamic approach to the content that they've put out, and there's a real variety in terms of what they're trying to do. I can't remember the car they used, but they were powering a busker set with an electric the powertrain from a particular car, an electric car. I can't remember the car now, but that was an interesting take of trying to show the range of the car, so much so that it can power an entire set, which a creator who is a busker creator is performing. He's him with a guitar and a microphone. That's one. You'd call that
Yep.
a bit kind of brandy in terms of it's quite engaging and entertaining. But they also do the hardworking stuff where they look at cars and they reveal cars and they review cars. And I'd probably go visit their profile to understand when I mention about you can have quite a simple setup, but you can do it in an effective way, which makes it feel like it's part of the TikTok community. And it feels like it is actual piece of content a creator would develop themselves. It might be the way that the music is edited with the visuals, or the way that it's being cut between each of the different shots. I think they've said their approach is they haven't really been afraid to do and try many different things. And that's kind of another key point is you can kind of over strategize TikTok a little bit.
Yeah.
And until you get going and actually trying it, you never know. So
Yeah.
we'd always encourage, try it out, see what works, see what maybe doesn't do as well, and then build from there. And it does take time to really identify what I'd call your personality on TikTok, because there's a variety of ways in which you can go. Do you want to be slightly more humor based? Do you want to be a little bit more educational? We know providing information around cars is good. People like to understand or find out information about a particular product or even EV as a category. So maybe you could be a brand which starts to shorten that kind of that knowledge gap. But yeah, I think the Arnold Clark profile is a great example of just trying different things and giving it a go. As I said, it's probably the best advice, just kind of starting off and then building up from there.
So that's probably that's interesting. You've given two case studies in Peugeot and then Arnold Clark, who have kind of gone on a bit of a journey in terms of all in, or they've kind of used some different routes in terms of how they're resonating their brand and what they do as a business. If you've got, we'll have a number of listeners on today who've thought TikTok could be a good entertainment channel for them to kind of engage with their audience. Can you kind of share some of the 101, this is what you should be doing, these are the pitfalls, in a kind of a 2 or 3 minute snapshot of what a dealer or an OEM brand should be doing on TikTok and what they should definitely not be doing?
Absolutely. So, two places you can start off with visiting: the TikTok Creator Marketplace and the TikTok Creative Center. So, the Creator Marketplace is where we basically is a kind of a website slash database where we have loads of our creators. And when I say creators, again, I realize I haven't kind of defined what a creator is. What you may refer to as an influencer on other platforms. Creator on TikTok we see as your creative director. As I mentioned, TikTok is this entertainment platform, and so to engage with your user or your community or the audience, you need to be working with someone who's going to entertain, and creators are almost like your experts. So treat them as these people who really understand the platform, and you as a brand can tap into their expertise. The creator marketplace is a place where you can start and you can search for different creators from different backgrounds with different expertise, and you can actually then brief and have conversations within the TikTok creator marketplace. So if you are short on creative resource or the ability to produce content yourself, that's a really good place to start, because you can start working with creators directly and they can develop content for you that you could be running from your profile or from as a paid advert on TikTok. The second one, TikTok Creative Center, is a really good place to find out current trends that are popular on TikTok within the UK or different markets. If you're interested across the rest of Europe or the rest of the world, you can look at trending songs as well. You can see about popular categories, popular videos, good, high performing ads. So that's a good place. Maybe that you do have creative resource and you have the ability to develop content yourself, and you're trying to get some inspiration creatively. The Creative Center, TikTok Creative Center, is a really good place to start.
Okay, excellent. And you said in terms of kind of some of the pitfalls or some of the kind of we've seen this fail numerous times, or definitely don't do this. Is there any kind of key call outs apart from I presume being true to your brand in terms of what you're wanting to do and what you're trying to achieve, the creator marketplace, but is there anything else that you kind of need to call out?
So it's vertical video. So 9:16, we can go through some hygiene stuff. So make sure you always shoot in vertical, not landscape.
That's kind of it is like that must be like one of the things that you get frustrated in.
The majority appreciate that it is vertical, just the way that it's experienced. So, but it's an important thing to call out nonetheless. It's sound on, so that's a hugely important thing to note. Is it's a sound on platform. It's if you are on TikTok yourself, you'll understand that when you're in TikTok, you're in it. It's very difficult to be distracted by anything else. It's kind of that intimate, engaging environment. So utilize sound. Never create a video without sound, but also try and think sound first if you can. Often people go, "Oh, we'll just try and think about it afterwards." A really interesting way to approach is going, "Well, actually, what if the sound element was a starting point of this idea? What would it look like?" So when it comes to cars, ASMR is a really interesting category. And when I say ASMR, search it up online because I can't remember the official definition, but it's satisfying sounds and visuals. So often it means when it comes to cars, it's a really good way of demonstrating build quality or craftsmanship. And because you're heightening, people basically do it with the way they kind of stroke over the steering wheel or the dashboard, the way that, kind of the sound of the door when it closes, or the sound of new leather, the kind of visuals with that as well. It kind of communicates this idea of luxury quite well. So working within an ASMR space for automotive on cars is really interesting. So again, leaning into the sound element is vital. In terms of other pitfalls, no, like in reality, give it all a go. I don't want to be not a kind of a case of we don't want to be restricted by fear of doing something which may not resonate, because it's in reality you could do many different things and have many different approaches, and that kind of all give it a go. It's kind of making sure you're acknowledging the things that you definitely need to be doing, vertical and sound on, and probably having the car in the content itself is not a bad idea, to point out the obvious. But then think about, could you start to engage your workforce potentially? So again, with Arnold Clark, they've gone around and they interview some of the people at their dealerships in terms of their thoughts, maybe what their favorite car is, what car do they have, what was their dream car growing up. We often talk about TikTok lift. It's almost like you're kind of lifting the hood, lifting the bonnet basically on your business, and trying to give users a glimpse into how you operate. An example being is there's a lot of F1 brands on TikTok. You can kind of search for any of them, any of the main ones, and you'll see their profiles. Often their best performing content is stuff they've shot in the pit wall or in the
Yeah.
garage, because it's not really content that you see when it's on TV. There was one, I think it was a Mercedes AMG F1 profile, and it was that quite simply what happened to a tire after they took it off, after it got changed off. And part of it was just basically they have a hot scraper, which obviously takes off kind of the dirt and what's kind of built up over several laps. It was a really simple piece of content, but did extremely well. And it's an example of going, well, we're going to show you something which you wouldn't necessarily see. And when it's from a dealership perspective, maybe getting the opinions of people who work there, because they are trusted people. And as a community or as a user, I'm going to want to hear from the experts. So trying to get them front and center is really useful. Like having a human angle to that content is going to be an easier way for you to resonate as a brand with the TikTok community.
That's really interesting. I think the most interesting takeaway for me there is the sound on, sound first kind of piece of advice.
Yeah.
I consume data. I think people consume information in very different ways. So I tend to, on other social channels or other entertainment channels, engage with the sound off and use captions and kind of
Yeah.
we'll read the captions as I'm kind of digesting the information. But again, it's not. And this is the important thing with any channel that you're working with. The demographics are different. People consume the information in different ways. Different things work differently, essentially, for those best practices for those specific channels. Just to kind of, just whilst you were on there, I did look up ASMR, and it's autonomous sensory meridian response. So
There we
that's a
go.
really good, good feedback there in terms of the sound on, but also a really good pub quiz question, I think, as well. So
Yeah. I've already forgotten it. Sorry, but yeah, thank you for looking at that. Often, like as a starting point in terms of where do we go, or how do we start thinking about what we could be on TikTok, what we could do. My advice is like have an idea of where you want to get to. So what type
yeah,
of brand do you want to be on the platform? And as I mentioned earlier, is it that humor element? Is it the educator? Is it the kind of teacher? Is it the kind of just purely entertaining? Is it visually that you just want to go after stuff which looks amazing and looks kind of cinematic? We've seen there's a recent trend on TikTok, the Wes Anderson trend, which is all focused on creators developing this Wes Anderson look. And Wes Anderson, obviously, he's got a very distinctive look when it gets to kind of directors. And so users were imitating his distinct way of shooting. So we've seen this emergence of kind of cinematic look and feel content. So maybe if you've got the ability as a dealership and you've got someone who's unbelievable within editing and shooting, then you could go down that angle. The point is you have an idea of maybe where you want to get to, but you don't want to feel that that's kind of a straitjacket to say, well, we can only do stuff within that space. Feel like you can go into different areas, different communities, with maybe an idea of that's ultimately where we want to get to. But with each content or with each film, just have an idea of what the narrative is that you're trying to tell, or what's the story. Now, in terms of lengths of TikToks, it can be TikToks up to 10 minutes now. We wouldn't advise doing that, but traditionally when it comes to paid advertising, 20 to 30 seconds is a pretty efficient place to be. And when you're starting out, when it's a really long piece of content, it's going to be harder for you to fill it. So start off looking at maybe kind of 10, 20, 30 seconds and build up from there. But every time you create a piece of content, what's the story you're trying to sell? Is it a particular product point? Is it more just a car walk around? Is it a did you know? Is it a reveal? Is it something around kind of exciting? Is it kind of more showing about you as a business? Ignoring maybe the products you have, actually just saying this is who we are, these are the staff that we have, and this is kind of, why we want to engage with you and why you think you should engage with us. So always think that. And so, the time length thing is something to be aware of, but it shouldn't dictate what you're trying to tell. The thing which should kind of dictate every bit of content you put out is what's the story behind this TikTok which we're developing. If you can get
fantastic.
to there, that's a kind of a good place to start.
Well, that's been an amazing kind of 30-minute snapshot of what the automotive sellers and dealers and OEMs can kind of engage with on TikTok. We've had the Peugeot example. We've had the case study with Arnold Clark. You've given us kind of 5 top tips around kind of how to get engaged if you're not currently engaged in TikTok. I've got a bit more of a direct question for you now. in terms of kind of where your automotive journey began. So either what was your first car, or what was the what car does already you all kind of resonate with, or that was I always wanted one of those, or I had the best
Yeah.
experiences there.
So my first car was a Fiat Punto,
Nice.
uh, 2001, black. I loved it. It was as unreliable as you think it could be, but it was partly probably because I never kept it topped up with petrol. In all
Yeah.
honesty, as a 17-year-old, you always try and basically ride your luck on the red light,
Yeah.
and I did that multiple occasions,
Fumes
much
all
to
the
my
way, definitely.
yeah, much to my dad's disdain, to be honest. And there was a couple of times that on the way back from work, I was stuck in my car park because I think the part was the car park was on a hill, and so actually it was on a slant, so I couldn't start it. So I had to get a couple of times he came out with some petrol. But it would always have a place in my heart, the Fiat Punto. But before I joined TikTok, I worked a creative agency. I worked out on Audi, so Audi was my main client. So the A7, the RS7 has always got
Yeah.
kind of a special place. It's a stunning car. So yeah, and from a sentimental perspective, that's kind of would be nice to maybe own one day. So yeah,
Fantastic.
hopefully that's all right as a couple of examples.
No, they're great examples. Fiat Punto to an Audi, absolutely great, covering all
Yeah,
those
exactly. And
memories.
everything in between. Yeah.
Exactly. Excellent, Jack. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Like I said, if you want to hear more, what's the best way to find out if you're a dealer or an OEM wanting to kind of start this engagement process? Do they contact you? Do they go to the TikTok channel? Where's the best place to go and
Yeah.
visit?
Well, to be honest, the kind of best way. First, we always say when we want to get going, just download TikTok first and foremost, because a lot of people don't, and it's kind of like, oh, I've heard about it. Try it yourself. Trust me, you'll enjoy it. It's fun. If nothing else, it's fun. So download that. You can also search TikTok SMB, which is kind of then gives you some examples and some hints and tips as an SMB and what you can do on TikTok, and then it offers you support in terms of getting going from a paid perspective as well. So yeah, download TikTok, search up TikTok SMB, and then tap into those other couple of resources that I mentioned: Creative Marketplace and Creative Center.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Jack. Thank you to our listeners for dialing in and listening for the last 30 minutes or so. Really appreciate your time today. It was really interesting to find out more about TikTok and the automotive section and what you're doing. If you'd like to hear more from the Autofixa solutions, you can follow our podcast on Spotify and also other streaming channels. And yeah, thank you once again, Jack, and hope you enjoyed the session today, listeners.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it very much. So looking forward to another one of these in the near future, I'm sure.
Excellent. Cheers, Jack.
Cheers, mate.